The story begins on a busy, snow-covered street during a cold winter night. In the middle of the crowd, a family walks happily while the daughter says the day was the best ever. Suddenly they stop because a tall, mysterious man appears blocking their path. The little girl looks up, amazed by the guy's height, and exclaims that he is very big. Our protagonist then complains in his thoughts about always having to dodge other people. Next, he realizes that in the middle of all those people, he is the only one who is alone. With that, the young man continues his solitary path toward a subway entrance. He stops for a moment and his gaze fixes on something a little further ahead. His eyes narrow as he notices a figure sitting on the cold ground. The character realizes that, after all, he is not the only lonely one on that street. A man dressed as Santa Claus is asking for help with a sign that invites people to make a wish. The protagonist remembers that today is Christmas Eve, the same day his parents passed away. Moved by the sad memory, the man decides to open his wallet to get a little money. He approaches the old man and offers the cash along with a snack he had with him. The young man then places the food and the money on the beggar's sign. Unexpectedly, the white, bearded man holds his wrist with surprising strength, thanking him for his kindness. The old man insists on returning the favor and asks the protagonist to tell him a wish. The young man is confused, thinking the other guy has lost his mind, and asks him to let go of his hand. But the costume man's grip is incredibly strong, and the young man cannot break free. The supposed Santa Claus reveals that he came to grant the wish of a good person and completely immobilizes him. Santa Claus then begs for the young man's wish, because only then can he return to his village. Tired of the situation, the protagonist asks if he will be let go once he tells his request. At that moment, the young man remembers something painful and begins to say what he really wants. He then says he wants to win the lottery, but the old man claims that is not his real wish. The young man reflects for a moment on what he truly wants for his life. His greatest desire is to have a family that never abandons him and is always with him. With a smile, he reveals that his wish is for a sweet wife and a very cute daughter. The bearded man feels the sincerity and realizes that the young man has had a very lonely life. With that, the old man feels lucky to have found someone like him, a kindred spirit. His eyes turn red, and he promises to find him a pure wife and a daughter who respects him. The protagonist is shocked to hear Santa Claus wish him a happy and joyful life. Finally breaking free, he runs away, calling the supposed good old man crazy. The man shouts that he will use all his power and that the other Santas are cheering for him. The scene changes and the protagonist is falling into a train, thinking that it was all just a delusion. Even so, he wonders why he told his wish to that stranger. Looking at a family poster, he admits that he only did it because he also wants to be happy. He closes his eyes, wishing to have the same happiness as all other people. Right after, the young man smells something strange and feels an intense cold. He wakes up groaning and shirtless in a completely unknown place. Startled, the character opens his eyes and panics at what he sees around him. The protagonist's vision is blurry, but he realizes he is in a moving wagon. He then realizes he is trapped inside a cage and wonders where he ended up. Looking around, he sees other chained people and thinks he traveled back to the Middle Ages. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps outside the cell catches his attention. Two guards are talking in an unknown language, and the young man does not understand anything they say. The medieval setting and the strange language leave him completely lost about his situation. Thus, he concludes that no matter if it is a dream or reality, he ended up in another world. The young man notices an unconscious prisoner and thinks that the living need to keep going. He approaches the man, apologizing, and decides to take his clothes to get dressed. With the other prisoner's garments, the protagonist now has something to cover his body. Santa Claus's voice then echoes in his mind, promising to grant his wish with all his power. The young man wonders if this is the happiness he was promised and hopes to wake up soon. Thus, several days and nights pass with him trapped in that wagon heading somewhere. During this time, he discovered that everyone in the wagon, including himself, are captives. The man also understood the reason why the soldiers are dragging them around. Apparently, the goal of that trip is to take everyone to be traded as workers. When they reach a village, a man who looks like the boss comes to choose the best prisoners. Accepting his new condition hurt his pride but also gave him a drop of expectation. That was his only chance to get out of the wagon, and being in good shape, he thought he would be chosen. That was the first hope he felt since arriving in that strange world. But his hope faded because no one picked him even after passing through several villages. So the wagon continued its endless path through distant forests and mountains, and he remained trapped in that wooden cage, feeling increasingly hopeless. Fallen on the floor, the young man wonders if it is worth going on just to endure so much hardship. In that moment, he remembers his mother advising him to always work hard and live well. His mother used to ask if he had understood the important advice she gave him. Joan then wonders if he will be able to endure all that miserable situation. The memory of Santa Claus promising happiness comes back to haunt him even more. Filled with frustration, he grabs a fork and expresses his anger at that world and his original one as well. In his moment of despair, the protagonist squeezes the object with all his might. For him, happiness now is just escaping that terrible pain once and for all. But he stops at the last second because deep down he does not want to give up in a place like that. The young man remembers his deepest wish, which was simply to be happy and have a family. The man then calms down and stands there holding the fork, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a very beautiful woman appears outside the cage and offers him bread. With a gentle smile, she passes the food through the bars to the hungry prisoner. Right after, a very cute little girl appears hiding behind the lady. Surprised by the appearance of the two, the young man drops the fork on the wagon floor. The scene then changes to a small and humble wooden house in the middle of a clearing. Inside the house, the same woman and the little girl are sitting together, eating at a table. Inside the house, the little blonde girl drinks her soup straight from the bowl. The woman then offers her own food to the little one and tells her to eat more. The girl stops for a moment and stares at the 2 bowls of food on the table. The lady explains that she is full, so she is giving her the meal so she can eat more. But the girl named Lizzie replies that if the woman is hungry, then she is too. With that, the child pushes the bowl of food back to the older woman. The woman smiles at the little one's attitude and agrees to eat along with her. Suddenly, loud knocks on the door startle them both, announce the arrival of the village chief. Quickly, the lady picks up the girl in her arms and tells her not to open the door. Just listen. The man announces that it has been decided that one of the prisoners will be her husband, and she is shocked. He also orders her to prepare to return to the mountain with her new husband. The woman despairs, not knowing what to do, because she does not want to go through that again. Even knowing she cannot simply run away, she hugs the little girl very tightly. She thinks that despite knowing the child for a short time, she cannot abandon her. The lady cries at the thought of having to leave the little one alone in that place. Sensing the woman's fear, the little girl starts to cry with eyes full of tears. Next, the girl breaks down into a loud and desperate cry over the situation. The sound of the child's crying echoes through the dark house, making the atmosphere even heavier. The woman is left alone and scared, wondering what is going to happen to her now. She curls up on the floor, thinking that she does not want to go through that horrible experience again. The woman begins to remember her painful past and everything that led her there. She thinks that the situation of the sleeping little girl is very similar to hers. The 5-year-old girl did not even have a name and was the daughter of the man who had passed away. Then the lady remembers that her father traded her for a single rabbit pelt. On the very first day in her new cabin, she was mistreated by her supposed husband. The man hurt her before she could even unpack her bags. At that moment, she realized her miserable life was just beginning. Fallen on the floor, the woman saw the little girl slowly approaching. In the midst of all that nightmare, the only person who helped her was that angelic child. The girl then crouched down to try and comfort the hurt woman on the floor. With a gentle touch, the little girl showed all her concern and affection for her. After that day, the man who went to the mountains never returned home. The villagers said he was lost to wolves in the hunting grounds and would never return. When she heard that he was gone, she felt relief but at the same time a terrible fear. The woman knew that now she would be an unprotected widow in that dangerous place. A lady without a husband was like a sheep outside the fence, ready to be targeted, and so the two step out of the cabin and walk hand in hand toward the village. The little girl then stops suddenly and points at something in the distance. Her eyes widen when she sees a wagon and she shouts excitedly at the discovery. The woman looks in the same direction and sees the wagon with a caged prisoner inside. As they get closer, the young man inside the cage slowly lifts his head. The woman then realizes that this is the same prisoner she helped earlier. At that moment, the protagonist's eyes widen because he recognizes the two of them. A memory of harshness and despair then floods his mind all at once. At the same time, the lady remembers the shouting and the mistreatment she suffered from her husband. She remembers how she protected the little girl from the fury of that cruel man. In his eyes, the prisoner's reflection shows all her confusion and shock. With the bread in her hands, the woman stands still, not knowing what to do with the situation. Right after, the village chief appears and asks if she was around there. The man warns that the soldiers are arriving and tells her to return to the village. With a forced smile, she tells the little one that they need to leave. But the little girl seems concerned and keeps looking at the man in the cage. The prisoner, in turn, looks at the bread in his hand with an empty expression. Driven by hunger, he begins to eat the food the woman gave him. Suddenly, two guards open the cage and yell for the protagonist to get out. They then roughly throw him out of the wagon straight onto the dirt ground. Fallen, he sees the piece of bread that rolled away with the sudden fall. Shortly after, the three prisoners are kneeling while the chief tells them to begin. Without warning, the guards take down the other two men with their sharp tools. With the men down, one of the guards cleans his used blade on a scroll. The guards then show glowing scrolls, and the protagonist wonders what kind of magic that is. Disheartened by the scene, the young man questions what kind of crazy world he ended up in. One of the soldiers approaches the village chief and whispers that he smells manna. The chief then turns around and stares at the prisoner, who remains kneeling on the ground without understanding. The young man lifts his face with a confused and lost expression about what is happening. The scene changes and we return to the lady's cabin, where she receives a visit from an older woman. The older woman hands over some supplies and tells her to take them when she returns to the cabin. She warns that the man does not understand the language, and that the young woman will have to repay everything one day. Being honest, the lady reveals that nobody liked her late husband and only accepted him for being a hunter. However, she thinks the new guy is different because the soldiers said he is a commoner. The older woman comments that he looks rough, but his hands and feet are as soft as a noble's. With a smile, she says he never hurt anyone and if he hunts well, they will live comfortably. The young woman replies that she does not need comfort and holds the lady's hands with gratitude. With tears in her eyes, she says she just hopes the new husband is not aggressive. All she wants is someone who will leave her and the little girl in peace, nothing more. Suddenly, knocks on the door startle them both while a voice shouts to open it. Frightened, the lady hugs the little one, who sleeps peacefully in her lap. She peeks through a crack in the wall and sees the protagonist arriving with the village chief. The older man then enters the house and announces that he brought her new husband. In shock, the lady asks about her new husband, and the chief orders her to welcome him. The protagonist enters the house and asks where they are taking him, not understanding anything. The lady gets scared and asks why they dragged a sick man to her house. She looks at the standing young man and wonders if he will really be her new husband. Startled by his height, the young woman thinks she has never seen anyone so big in her life. The man in turn is confused by her fearful reaction and does not understand the reason. He then recognizes the woman as the same one who gave him a piece of bread earlier. Seeing her tremble, the protagonist wonders why she is so scared of him. At that, the village chief grabs him by the arm and asks why he is just standing there. The older man then pulls him forcefully closer to the woman and the little girl. Pointing at the young man, the chief formally introduces him as the lady's new husband. Next, he takes both of their hands and tells them not to be so tense since they are getting married. With a satisfied smile, the village chief joins the new couple's hands. He then compliments them both, saying they make a beautiful couple and that everything is settled. The young man still does not understand anything and starts connecting the dots of the situation. Then he remembers Santa Claus's promise about a pure wife and a lovely daughter. A wife who looks like a scared rabbit right in front of him, and a daughter who looks like a small, cute hamster curled up behind her mother. Joan then wonders if that Santa Claus was real and if his wish was actually granted. Even if his wish was granted, he does not understand why he was thrown into another world. He questions if it was impossible to receive his gift without going through all that hardship. Filled with anger, the protagonist swears he will get back at Santa Claus if he finds him again. In his mind, he sees himself as a furious bear and the woman and the girl as frightened animals. Outside, the young man is with the villagers but understands nothing of what they say. This drives him crazy because he cannot understand a single word of their conversation. The village chief and two other men stare at him, seeming to discuss his future. At that, one of the villagers approaches and extends his hand, and Joan wonders if it is a handshake. The young man accepts the greeting, but the other man's grip is surprisingly strong. The villager winces in pain, and the protagonist wonders if a crushing grip is the local greeting. With a thoughtful look, he tries to understand what is happening in that strange situation. He then lets go of the man's hand, who stumbles backward, yelling something incomprehensible. While the villager complains about the pain, the village chief starts laughing at the whole scene. The man kneels with his hand glowing, and the chief hands a bow and arrow to the protagonist. Holding the weapon, he is left without a reaction upon receiving the hunting item from the older man. He wonders why they are giving him that but feels it is not to start a fight. Then the chief starts gesturing desperately, trying to explain something to him. The man mimics a rabbit's ears and Joan begins to understand what he means. He finally realizes that the villagers want him to learn to hunt for the village. The chief is surprised to see that the newcomer managed to understand his mime. With a smile, he points to the forest as if showing the way to the hunt. Right after, a white rabbit appears peacefully eating some leaves on the grass. The village chief points at the rabbit and yells for him to shoot, but the young man has never used a bow. He remembers Olympic archery and that it is hard for a beginner to hit the target. Even so, the protagonist pulls the bowstring with all his might and concentrates. Unexpectedly, the arrow hits the rabbit dead on, leaving it no time to react. The chief is shocked by his aim, and Joan wonders how that happened. Still not believing what he did, the hunter stands there processing the scene. He then spots his new wife and her daughter returning to the clearing. A drop of sweat runs down his face as he watches them slowly approaching. Joan finally realizes that this beautiful woman really is his bride. He feels his face heat up, and a strange feeling begins to rise inside him. Everyone around notices his reaction and does not understand what is happening. Shortly after, the new family is gathered to have their first meal together. The lady serves the food in bowls for her new husband and little Lizzie. The meal is a simple stew, but it looks very tasty and nutritious. The young man picks up his spoon and stares at the two, who watch him with some curiosity. He tries the food, and they are surprised by his unexpected reaction. Without saying a word, the protagonist continues to eat the stew he was served. Then a small smile appears on his face, showing that he enjoyed the meal. The word family had always been something distant for him from his teenage years to his 30s. But now, a man like him has finally been given a family to care for and protect. He thinks it would be better if they became a family naturally, but the order does not matter anymore. Looking up at the sky, the young man says he wants to deal with Santa Claus, but at the same time, the protagonist sincerely gives thanks for finally getting a real family. The next day, things start happening very fast, and they set out on a journey. Carrying a heavy sack, he turns around and notices that the two are having a hard time keeping up. The woman and the child look exhausted from the long walk on the forest trail. This frustrates him because he cannot even ask if they are okay due to the language barrier. With that, he decides he needs to adapt to this new world as quickly as possible. Then he remembers his mother advising him never to hesitate when he wants to protect someone. His mother used to say that the moment he feels the urge to protect, he must act right away. Motivated by the memory, the young man continues his walk with a new determination. Suddenly, the two stop and little Lizzie starts holding onto her mother's skirt. With tears in her eyes, the little girl cries from exhaustion, unable to walk any further. Seeing the scene, Joan kneels and tells her not to be afraid because he will hold her for a bit. The girl's mother panics at his approach and what he might do. Desperate, she tries to say something in her language, but he cannot understand anything. Scared, the little girl starts crying even louder at the frightening situation. He is surprised by their reaction and thinks he should not have even made a serious face. Then the protagonist excuses himself and simply picks them both up at once. The woman and the child are completely shocked at being carried like that. The woman and the little girl hold on to him, surprised by the young man's strength. Effortlessly, the protagonist carries them both in his arms and continues on the path. The lady is left completely speechless by her new husband's unexpected action. Jo-won adjusts them in his arms so they are more comfortable during the long journey. Then little Lizzie looks at him and calls him Avari with a curious voice. The young man then looks at the little girl, not understanding what she just said. With a gentle smile, he asks his new wife to hold on to him tightly. He thinks that even with the luggage and the two of them on his back, they do not feel heavy at all. Then the man decides to learn the language and hunt so he can feed his new family well. He realizes that from now on his life will be much busier than before. The woman stares at him with tears in her eyes, moved by his kindness and strength. And so they continue their journey with the young man carrying his new family in his arms. Finally, they reach a small cabin, and the village chief bids them farewell. The older man leaves, leaving the new couple and the child alone in their house. Looking at the cabin, the protagonist thinks that place seems to be very cold. A shiver runs through his body, and he remembers how he has always hated feeling cold. Even so, he approaches the door and prepares to enter his new home. The hunter slowly opens the door and peeks inside the small wooden house. Inside, the woman waits for him with a tearful expression and her hands clasped in prayer. Confused by the scene, he asks why she is crying, but the lady does not answer. Suddenly, the woman runs into the house, leaving the protagonist behind without understanding. He looks inside and realizes that the shelves are empty and the house is a mess. Standing at the door, the young man is shocked to see that the inside of the cabin has been completely ransacked. Outside, the lady tells him that while she was in the village, everything they had was taken. The man worries because the cold is coming, and he has no way to protect his new family. He then finds his wife sitting on the grass and says he finally found her. The hunter sits next to her, and the two stay silent for a moment. With a gentle gesture, he pets the woman's head, who looks at him surprised and moved. His touch is soft and comforting, showing that he cares about her well-being. The young man tells her not to worry, and the young woman wonders if that is what he means. With a heavy heart, she thinks that this man is the one she will have to live with from now on. She worries because they cannot communicate and he barely knows how to hunt to survive. The lady questions whether they will be able to survive together in such a difficult place. A confident smile then appears on the protagonist's face as he looks at her with determination. With absolute certainty, he promises that he will protect her from all harm. Despite all the anxiety and doubt she feels, the woman looks at him with a lighter heart. In the midst of all the despair, she wonders why she feels so relieved by his words. The young man then reflects on his life and how he has been alone since his parents passed away. Even through all the difficulties, he managed to survive and move forward with his life. Now that he has a family, there is no reason for him not to endure whatever comes his way. He promises that he will find a way to support them no matter what happens. Moved by his words, the woman begins to cry softly, unable to hold back. The young man then pulls her into a hug, trying to comfort her in her emotional moment. Seeing the scene, the little girl runs toward them, shouting something in her language. The girl hugs her mother tightly and asks the man not to hurt Rigi. And so the new family stays there together with the mother and daughter in the protector's arms. The young man reflects on the situation with a woman crying in his arms, and also with a child crying next to them because of all that confusion. Many questions pop into his mind, but he has no way of getting the answers. Even so, he promises that he will make her the happiest person and will never make her cry again. Jo-won swears he will be a good husband and a good father so they will never regret it. The scene changes to the cabin, now renovated and with firewood piled up outside. Sitting on the floor, the protagonist thinks they are back to square one in their relationship. He feels like a stranger again, but on the other hand, this is almost a relief to him. Suddenly, the hunter has an idea to try to get closer to his new family. With a gesture, he catches the attention of the two, who look at him curiously. Pointing to himself, the young man says his name out loud, so they know. He thinks that since they are going to live together, they need to at least know each other's names. The woman and the child stare at him, surprised by the new family member's attitude. Then the protagonist extends his hand and asks the lady to tell him her name as well. With a bit of hesitation, the woman replies that her name is Raiji, and the young man listens. She then repeats her name more firmly, and the protagonist finally understands. With a smile, he says her name is very beautiful and points to the little one. Jo-won then turns to the little girl and asks what her name is. The girl looks at her mother, and the atmosphere gets heavy, and the young man wonders why. Seeing the sadness in the child's eyes, he realizes that she still does not have a name. The protagonist stays silent for a moment, thinking about what he can do. Then, with a loving gesture, he decides he will give the little one a name. He calls her Dorothy, remembering the girl from The Wizard of Oz. The young man explains that she is like the girl who goes on adventures with many friends, and that in the end, she achieves her own happiness and becomes a lovely child. The little girl repeats her new name, and he says he will bring many friends and love. With a radiant smile, the little one now named Dorothy seems very happy. Outside, the new family man starts chopping wood with an axe. Hiding, Rigi watches him and thinks that man is really very strange. She reflects that he is bigger than the deceased but treats her with much kindness. The woman realizes that he is different from everyone she has ever known. In her thoughts, she whispers his name and notices his gentle and refined voice. Rigi remembers all the suffering she went through and that she never received so much goodness. With a smile, she wonders why that man is being so good to her. Rigi continues to watch the man and thinks he does not seem to belong in that place. Suddenly, he sees her and, with a smile, waves and shouts her name to get her attention. The woman is surprised and notices the young man's black eyes and hair as he looks at her. She remembers a rumor about a country at war that successfully summoned a hero. The legend said that this legendary hero had completely black hair and eyes. The protagonist then walks towards her with a gentle and curious look. Riji thinks he somewhat fits the hero's description but highly doubts it. She thinks a hero would not be there, and that it is all just a simple rumor. The two stand perfectly still in front of each other in awkward silence. The lady gets nervous with him getting closer and stares at him with a racing heart. Looking closely, she confirms that his hair and eyes are indeed black. Relief washes over her and Riji wonders why she feels so good. She does not understand why she is so relaxed around someone she barely knows. Her reaction confuses her while Jo-won observes her without understanding anything. The hunter then affectionately strokes her head, and the young woman finds the gesture very strange. Riji remembers that the only time a man touched her head was to mistreat her, but she admits the feeling is nice and wishes he would continue the affectionate gesture longer. The woman feels safe and wants him to keep touching her head like that. The young man blushes a little at her reaction and continues the gesture very tenderly. Then he leans in and surprises the lady with a soft kiss on her forehead. The kiss on the forehead leaves the lady completely surprised and speechless at the gesture of affection. He pulls away completely embarrassed, and she stands there looking like she saw a ghost. With that, the young man feels awkward and starts stuttering, not knowing what to say. On impulse, he grabs a wooden bucket nearby to distract himself. Gripping the handle tightly, he needs an excuse to get out of there quickly. Without thinking twice, the hunter runs away, leaving his wife behind. The woman is left with a bright red face and her heart racing at his action. In his thoughts, he curses himself and wonders what she will think of that attitude. He remembers that, despite being married, they met today and he is confused. To make matters worse, they do not speak the same language, so what should he do now? The hunter wonders if he should just act as if nothing happened. At that, he stops and wonders how far he has already walked and where he ended up. The young man then decides to get some water and return as quickly as possible. Suddenly, he senses a strange presence and goes on alert for danger. From the shadows, a giant wolf with glowing red eyes appears right in front of him. The creature bares its sharp teeth and growls, ready to strike at any moment. Even sweating cold, the protagonist faces the beast without showing an ounce of fear. Jo-won is surprised by the animal's size and realizes it is a real wolf. Calmly, he crouches next to his bucket and a piece of wood on the ground. Without hesitating, the man grabs the piece of wood to use as a weapon against the wolf. The giant wolf lunges, but the protagonist jumps at it with the club. The beast then bites the piece of wood and shatters it with its sharp teeth. With a shout of fury, the young man lands a direct punch on the wild animal's head. The blow hits the wolf dead on, and it feels the impact with full force. Next, the creature bites his arm, and the hunter complains of pain from the bite. He does not give up and lands another punch on the beast, because he refuses to be defeated there. With a shout of determination, his fist glows with a very bright blue light. The magical punch hits the wolf, which howls in pain at the unexpected attack. At that moment, the man's entire body bursts into flames and he screams in agony. His eye widens in surprise as he does not understand what is happening. The wolf's mouth starts to catch fire, and the young man is shocked by the bizarre scene. Jo-won looks at his own flaming arm in complete disbelief. He then climbs on the beast's back and starts punching its head with his flaming fist. The man continues to strike the animal non-stop with all his might. The flaming punches hit the wolf dead on, and it is unable to defend itself. The beast finally falls to the ground motionless, and the protagonist pants from exhaustion. Lying on the grass, he wonders what happened and remembers seeing his arm in flames. But looking at his arm and his clothes, there is not a single burn mark. With his hand on his face, he questions whether he just used magic somehow. He remembers the guards and realizes he gained powers when he came to this world. The young man remembers that gaining powers in another world is something that always happens in books. Lying on the grass, he covers his face and thinks that if that is the case, then maybe. He then raises his hand and excitedly shouts for a fireball, but nothing happens. Standing up, the hunter keeps trying to summon the magic, but his effort is in vain. Jo-won tries other spells like Firestorm and Firewall, but with no success. The man shouts several different incantations, but the result is the same as before. With a bored look, he realizes he cannot use magic just by wanting to. Even so, he knows it was not an illusion and that his wounds healed slightly. He dreams of providing a happy life with tasty food for his new family. Jo-won thinks that in a village with no doctors, he could use magic to heal others. So he decides to think calmly because he knows the power will appear again someday. A sad memory takes him back to his grandfather's funeral shortly after losing his parents. His grandfather was healthy but passed away in an accident, and his uncle blamed him for the tragedy. The uncle accused him of being the cause of the loss of his only brother and his father too. Fallen on the floor, he heard his relatives shout that he was the cause of all evil. His relatives treated him like a plague that brought misfortune wherever he went. Back in the present, he decides he needs to drain the wolf's blood but fears other beasts. Wasting no time, the young man throws the giant wolf over his shoulders and decides to head home. He remembers when his grandfather used to butcher animals and how that helped him a lot now. Under the moonlight, he walks and thinks his grandfather would be very proud of him. He wonders how he's going to train his new magic while carrying the giant wolf on his back. Meanwhile, at the cabin, Riji and Dorothy are busy with household chores. Little Dorothy then runs excitedly to hand a bowl to her mother. With a smile, Riji thanks her daughter for the help and pets her head. The girl breaks into a radiant smile from ear to ear at the affectionate gesture. Full of energy, the little girl runs around the house, thrilled with her new family. Suddenly, she stops at the door and her eyes widen at what she sees outside. The giant wolf's head appears at the entrance, and the little one screams in terror at the scene. Ryuji hears the scream and runs desperately to see what happened to her daughter. Without thinking twice, she grabs a knife from the table to defend herself from the threat. The woman runs to the door and shouts for Dorothy to get behind her for protection. Her eyes show all her determination to protect the child at any cost. She then sees Jo-won carrying the beast and shouts his name, worried about the situation. With the knife in hand, she runs to attack the wolf, not realizing it is already defeated. Tired, the young man drops the animal's carcass on the ground upon hearing his wife scream. The two run up to him, and the hunter calls them by their names to calm them down. Ryuji stops in front of him with her knife drawn, completely shocked by the scene. She then hugs him in relief, and he says he is fine despite getting hurt. Little Dorothy also runs to hug his leg, crying tears of relief and fear. With a smile, he says the wolf only bit his arm, but that everything is okay now. Under the moonlight, the new family sits next to the wolf, and he says he is fine. Ryuji then says something in her language, and he blushes all over without understanding the word. He realizes she is thanking him and feels happy about her affection. Little Dorothy also says something, and he assumes she was worried too. The young man feels bad because he swore to never make them cry again, and he already failed at that. A crow lands on the cabin roof as night falls over the forest. Inside the house, Jo-won begins to skin the wolf with a sharp and precise knife. He uses the blade carefully to separate the giant animal's pelt from its meat. The hunter admits the job is harder than it looked when his grandfather did it. Tired, he decides that next time he will try to do it a different way. With the meat separated, he prepares to finish the job once and for all. Suddenly, he hears his name and sees Ryuji's silhouette standing in the doorway. With sweat on his face, he calls her name and wonders what she wants. The woman then approaches with a bucket in her hands, and the protagonist calls her again. She says something, and he understands from her gestures that he should put the meat in the bucket. With a smile, he realizes she wants to help carry the meat inside. The young man struggles to remember how to say thank you in the language of that world. He then tries to pronounce the word, and Ryuji looks at him surprised by the attempt. The lady flashes a sweet smile, and he realizes he got the pronunciation of the word right. The man wonders if he said something wrong, and the two stand there looking at each other awkwardly. With a gentle smile, the young woman tries to pronounce the word in his language, asking if it was right. At that, the young man smiles sincerely and thanks the lady for trying to learn his language. His wife gets a little embarrassed by the affectionate response and stares at him, not knowing what to say. Then the hunter turns to grab the wooden bucket, and she reflects that she had never received a thank you before. The lady bends down to help him, and thinks that he thanked her for something as simple as bringing water. As they walk together, the woman realizes she is experiencing many good things for the first time. In that moment, she remembers the affection she received earlier, and how his lips touched her forehead. The memory makes the young woman's face burn with embarrassment, and her heart races in her chest. Even finding it all very embarrassing, the wife follows him indoors, consumed by curiosity. Ryuji wonders if he has done this with other women and if they felt the same thing she did. Thinking about it makes her chest ache quite a bit, and the lady feels like crying from this mix of feelings. Inside, the man puts the things on the table, but gets startled when she suddenly enters the cabin. He steps back, making room for the woman who approaches the meat, finding that attitude very strange. The young woman reflects that tasks like this should be done by her, but the hunter acts as if it is his duty. With that, the two end up holding the meat together, and the young man stares at her, leaving an unexpected mood in the air. The wife approaches him, completely nervous, and wonders what she should do in that situation. The protagonist then leans toward her, making the young lady even more anxious with the proximity. But he merely places another soft kiss on her forehead, leaving the girl completely shocked and red. At that, she steps back quickly, dying of embarrassment, and mentally curses herself for closing her eyes. Desperate, the woman grabs her own hair, thinking the husband thought she wanted a kiss on the lips. With a red face, the young woman decides to keep her eyes open this time so her husband will not misunderstand. But surprisingly, the hunter steps closer and gives her a passionate kiss straight on the lips. He then pulls away with a calm smile, while the lady is left completely paralyzed by the shock of the kiss. At that, the young man turns around with the bucket in hand and notices that the little girl is spying on them. Little Dorothy was watching everything on the sly, and the wife falls into despair upon noticing that her daughter saw the scene. Mortified, the woman runs off like a hurricane, leaving the protagonist totally confused. Later, the little family walks peacefully through the sunny forest while the lady walks further ahead. The man follows right behind, carrying the wooden bucket, and the little girl tries to keep up with his long strides. At that moment, the hunter notices the child is stretching her little hands, trying to reach the large container. Not understanding, the young man stops and tries to figure out what the girl wants, and soon realizes she just wanted to be called by her name. With that, a gentle smile appears on the husband's face, who decides to please the girl by thanking her for her attitude. So he lowers the bucket a little and thanks Dorothy for helping with the family's heavy lifting. The little girl beams with a radiant smile and holds the edge of the object, feeling very useful and loved by her new father. The scene changes to the inside of the cabin, where Ryuji pets the giant wolf's large pelt lying on the wooden floor. Sitting right behind, the protagonist watches the scene, wondering why she is drying that indoors. But suddenly, a light bulb goes off in his head, and he finally understands the real reason behind that action. He realizes that this thick, soft pelt must be a very valuable and important treasure to his new wife. Right after, little Dorothy approaches her mother, staring at the large fuzzy rug with great curiosity. The child cannot resist and touches the dark fur of the beast, marveling at the soft texture of the huge animal. Watching the mother and daughter smiling together, the young man feels his heart warm at seeing his family so happy and safe. The scene cuts to the small wooden cabin surrounded by trees in the middle of the mountain. Inside, Rigi works carefully massaging salt into 2 pieces of tender meat. Observing everything, the young man realizes how meat is cured and decides to learn the process. With a smile on her face, the young woman seems very happy to have saved that useful fat. At that, the hunter reflects that he still needs to learn many things in this different world. Staring at the wolf pelt, he wishes to quickly understand how valuable trades work there. So the man stretches and decides he has rested enough and needs to get to work. Suddenly, he stands up quickly, startling his wife who is right behind him. Worried, the lady waves her hands, asking her husband to sit down and rest more. But the young man smiles and makes a sign saying he is fine now and feels no pain at all. With a soft touch on her shoulder, the hunter assures her that he will not push past his limits. Then he turns to leave, leaving the young lady completely speechless at his care. Walking through the forest, the man finds a large tree perfect for practicing his swing. Staring at his reflection in the axe, he trusts his great strength even without having any experience. Wasting no time, the protagonist lifts the heavy tool firmly and prepares for the strike. With a shout of effort, he brings the heavy blade down with all his power onto the wood, but the force is so great that the entire tree snaps at once, falling heavily onto the dirt ground. Scared by the damage, the young man cowers, shielding his head, not understanding what happened. Later, the husband opens the cabin door carrying a basket full of chopped firewood. Seeing this, the mother and daughter are completely shocked by the hunter's speed and strength. The husband enters the cabin carrying a giant wooden basket, and the young woman rushes over worried to welcome him. Tired, the protagonist suddenly sits on the floor, leaving his wife confused by the action. The lady holds his hands, asking if he hurt anything, but the hunter quickly assures her everything is fine. At that moment, little Dorothy appears, handing a cloth to her new father to wipe the sweat from his face. Right after, the little girl runs excitedly across the room, leaving the young man amazed by her attitude. She goes to a large wooden bucket and wets both her little hands in the clean water with great joy. With that, the child runs back toward the hero, leaving a trail of wet footprints across the floor. Without warning, the daughter jumps onto the big guy's chest, leaving the mark of her little hands on his clothes. The protagonist is startled but breaks into a wide smile seeing his little girl's cute playfulness. Watching it all, Rigi lets out a hearty laugh, and the atmosphere in the house becomes incredibly light and very fun. The little one then stares at the man with big bright eyes, waiting to see what his reaction would be. With great tenderness, the father pets the girl's head and thanks her for taking care of him. But the child gets super hyper and starts running non-stop through the kitchen while he asks her to stop. At that, the young man and his wife burst out laughing, feeling that this perfect moment feels more like a good dream. He hugs the young woman and mentally promises to protect those smiles, as he never imagined being so happy in life. The scene then cuts to the outside, showing the small cabin surrounded by the large lush forest. Thick smoke rises from the stone chimney, indicating that night has come and dinner is ready. Inside, the 2 adults eat a real feast, while the daughter sleeps peacefully right there on the floor. Suddenly, Rigi and her husband stop eating, surprised by a little noise coming from under the dining table. Cute Dorothy has dozed off and sleeps hugging her own spoon in the middle of that wonderful meal. Faced with this adorable scene, the couple bursts into laughter and enjoys that quiet moment together. Very carefully, the hero bends down and picks up the sleeping little girl in his arms so as not to wake her. He then stands up with the sleeping child in his arms under his wife's affectionate gaze. Carrying the little one, the big guy approaches the fireplace to warm her body with the fire. Next, the new father lays the girl down on the bed with all the gentleness in the world. The night advances in the silent forest, illuminating only a small pantry outside. Meanwhile, the young lady boils a cloth in the hot pan to clean the household items. But suddenly, her husband appears right behind her, walking silently through the kitchen. Without warning, the hunter gently holds the girl's wrist, stopping her from continuing the work. The wife turns her face, completely surprised by the sudden touch, and stares at the man without understanding. The young man blushes slightly and observes her with a deep look, leaving a very romantic mood in the air. The two stand there very close to each other, illuminated only by the dim light of the room. Gathering her courage, the lady raises her hand and uses the clean cloth to dry the sweat from the big guy's neck. With very gentle movements, she cleans the young man's skin, showing all her affection for him. In her thoughts, the young woman tries to push away her embarrassment, because caring for a partner is the duty of a good wife. Moved by this feeling, she lifts her husband's shirt and starts to dry his defined abdomen. The protagonist merely watches his partner's unexpected attitude and lets himself be taken care of by her. A sweet and calm smile appears on the hunter's face, revealing how much he's enjoying that. However, reality hits the lady and she realizes what she did, starting to wave her hands, mortified with embarrassment. Finding the scene very cute, the hero affectionately holds her hands to calm her nervousness. At that moment, he brings his face closer to hers, holding her hands very tenderly. With that, the young woman's heart suddenly races, leaving her totally nervous with his proximity. Then the young man breaks the silence and suggests with a soft voice that they both go to sleep soon. Thus, the new couple walks hand in hand to a small lit room on the outside. Inside, both lie down on the wooden floor, facing each other with a lamp in the middle. At that, the hero leans slowly over the lady, who gulps, feeling the mood heat up. She stares at him with wide eyes and a bit of fear of what might happen next. The wife takes a deep breath and tries to relax, waiting for her partner's gentle touch. He then kisses her very sweetly and reflects on how incredibly soft the girl's lips are. The big guy looks at the sleeping little one and wishes for his family to live a long time by his side. In his thoughts, the man begs the old man to keep these two people happy until his last breath. Meanwhile, Riji starts to remember that the nobles of that world live in grand castles full of rooms. However, the reality for commoners is quite different, where the whole family has to sleep in the same cramped space. With that, the children end up quickly discovering how couples spend their nights together. At that moment, a terrible memory floods her mind, bringing the frightening voice of her late father. At that time, the little girl hid under the covers, listening to her mother's sad crying until dawn. The young woman remembers that she felt constant terror, fearing that this dark future would also be hers. But the comforting sound of the crackling fireplace brings the girl back to reality. First thing in the morning, the lady wakes up in bed and is confused, as she clearly remembers falling asleep on the cold floor the night before. She then realizes that her husband offered his own arm as a pillow, leaving her extremely moved by his care. The young woman breathes a sigh of relief and realizes that a couple's nights were not so scary after all. Clinging to the hero's broad chest, she reflects that her whole world has changed for the better since then. With a serene smile, the lady nestles even deeper into the comforting warmth of that strong man. Shortly after, the hunter wakes up slowly and notices his new wife's affectionate closeness. He realizes that both the woman and the little girl are using his arms as a pillow. The girl's heart beats so fast that she feels it might jump out of her mouth at any moment. With a warm feeling in her chest, the young woman deeply wishes that this would last forever. The big guy then watches them in silence, enjoying the peace of that wonderful morning. Carefully, the protagonist gets up and covers his little daughter with a very warm blanket. Next, he gently strokes the blonde hair of the child, who mumbles in her sleep. Later, Riji walks to the fireplace with the intention of grabbing the empty metal bucket. But before she could grab the object, the young man holds the handle with his huge hand. Startled, the lady steps back a little while her husband gives her a very gentle smile. Full of energy, the hunter fills the large container, splashing clean water everywhere. With a serene face, he says a few words in the native language of that different world. The wife is totally confused, trying to understand what that man meant to say. With a red face, she mumbles something, and the young man does not understand her sudden shyness. The hero wonders if it was the affectionate way he called her that made her so nervous. At that, he deduces that the girl was embarrassed to be treated like a real wife. So the husband suggests using a cute nickname, and the blushing young woman asks to be called Darling. The hunter calls his wife Darling, and she turns completely red with embarrassment at this new affectionate nickname. At that, the lady turns her back trying to hide her face, but her neck gives away how nervous she is right now. He finds her reaction very cute and thinks he now feels like teasing the young woman just a little bit more. Then the young man gently touches his partner's back and asks her to look into his eyes again. Suddenly, little Dorothy wakes up and starts rubbing her eyes while letting out a very sleepy yawn. With that, the little girl starts daydreaming about a giant piece of meat flying right in front of her. The girl starts drooling with hunger as she imagines that delicious meal, and her stomach begins to rumble loudly. At that moment, the little one throws herself onto the wooden floor and starts crawling hurriedly toward the couple. Right after, the daughter runs excitedly into her parents' arms, shouting the name of her new family. The two adults are startled by the child's energy but are happy to see her so lively early in the morning. But the little girl's focus is really on the fresh meat, and her eyes shine with joy upon seeing the feast on the table. At that, the little one tries to climb onto a large wooden bucket while her parents watch the scene with a smile. The protagonist bursts out laughing when he hears his daughter shout for food with all the strength in her lungs. With her little legs in the air, the girl struggles to reach the bottom of the container in search of a snack. Seeing her appetite, the hunter decides he is going to work hard hunting so that the house never lacks anything. He walks through the dense forest carrying his axe and feels ready to face any fierce wolf. The young man now carries a much more reliable weapon and is determined to bring sustenance to his family. But suddenly, the mood changes and the protagonist senses a strange presence coming from amidst those dark trees. He stops for a moment and realizes that the atmosphere of the place has become heavy and suffocating in a scary way. At that instant, the hunter wonders what kind of monstrous creature will appear this time to test his strength. Suddenly, footsteps echo through the dark forest, and a mysterious figure slowly approaches the protagonist. Confused, the hero begins to sweat cold, trying to figure out who would be walking around in such an isolated place. At that, an old hooded man emerges from the shadows while the big guy grips his axe tightly as a precaution. The stranger displays a stern look under the dark hood, analyzing the young man with great attention and silence. At that moment, the young man wonders who that mysterious old man standing right in front of him could be. The scene then goes back in time, showing bloodstains spotting the rocks in that same forest. Standing at the spot, the elderly man observes the huge tracks and deduces that a giant beast passed through there recently. He reflects that he watched the cabin for days and concluded that the new resident does not even know how to hold a weapon properly. With that, the old man steps on a rock, finding it absurd that an ignorant rookie took down a monster. The gentleman shakes his head smiling, because even experienced hunter would fall facing that alone. Then he sharply turns his head, sensing that there is something very wrong and curious about this whole story. Driven by doubt, the man decides to walk through the woods to discover the truth with his own eyes. Back in the present, the visitor slowly approaches while the hunter maintains his defensive posture. The old man stares at the protagonist's injured arm, and his eyes light up when he notices something impressive there. He notices the marks of the wolf's fangs and is shocked to see that the wound is practically healed. In his mind, a bite like that would cause a lethal infection, and the hero would never be able to walk normally. With that, the elderly man comes to an absurd conclusion, suspecting that this big guy is actually a mage. He remembers that people with magic are extremely rare in this world and are almost never seen around. The young man remains standing, sweating nervously, while the mysterious man plans something grand in silence. Then the old man's glow a scary purple hue, and he smiles, asserting that his big chance has arrived. In his mind, the elderly man thinks that the chance for revenge he had waited so long for has finally knocked on his door. At that, the newcomer looks the stranger up and down, trying to decipher what kind of crazy person this is. Diving into the past, the old man remembers that, although he is stubborn nowadays, he was once a very vigorous warrior. At that time, forest guards needed to fight in wars to earn merits and become vassals to the nobles. Seeking independence, the young man left his father behind and traveled through various villages, wanting to become a great hunter. A short time later, he secured the position of guardian in a village surrounded by mountains full of valuable resources. However, the only problem with the place was the lack of firewood, as even commoners could enter the Lord's forest. With that, people had to go deeper into the woods, serving as the perfect excuse for him to map the unknown terrain. But the warrior made the mistake of never wondering why the villagers only gathered wood in the shallow part of the woods. Fallen and hurt, he recalls failing the test to protect the lands, as a guard needed to have his limbs intact. Completely terrified, the young man sweated cold, realizing he could never have foreseen the nightmare that was to come. Before him appeared a giant green monster, revealing that those horrendous creatures dominated the top of that mountain. Worst of all, those disgusting beasts kidnapped human women to create their own kind. Grabbed by the shoulder, the guard finally understood why that macabre place was known as the Village of Monsters. Trembling with dread, he discovered the hard way the dark reason behind the constant disappearance of the girls in that region. Surviving miserably, the hunter waited patiently for the day he would get back at those who ruined his life. Even hating the cowardly villagers of that settlement, the man swallowed his pride and lived alongside them for long decades. Crying with rage, he was driven only by a sick obsession to defeat every single one of those scoundrels one day. Holding a torch, the survivor swore he would not rest until he cleared out all the nests of those beasts to ashes. Returning to the present, the elderly man stares at the big guy with hope, absolutely certain that this young man can help him. The old hunter stares at the big guy, impressed by his immense size and monstrous strength that he has never seen around there. Besides all these physical attributes, the elderly man is shocked to note the absurd healing ability on the young man's arm. At that, the gentleman concludes that this young man has all the potential to become the strongest monster hunter ever seen. In his thoughts, he knows very well that dangerous creatures are still hiding deep within those mountains. With that, the veteran is certain that the monsters will attack the village again as soon as they run out of women to take. But before this tragedy happens, the elderly man decides he will turn that outsider into an exceptional warrior. For his plan to work, he decides to keep the beast head an absolute secret until a contract is signed. Giving a cunning smile, the master thinks the strength of the agreement will stop the rookie from simply running away whenever he pleases. Then the old man says a few words in his strange language while the hero gives a respectful bow in response. Watching closely, the experienced warrior notes that the young man did not lower his guard and kept his weight leaning back. At that moment, the gentleman states that from that day on, he would teach everything he knows about hunting to his new apprentice. The veteran assures him that he will become a great hunter, leaving the protagonist completely confused by that conversation. The next morning, the big guy stretches his body, feeling like he barely closed his eyes, and the sun has already risen, lighting up the house. Outside, the visitor waits patiently, as he thought it best not to ask to enter the cabin of that new family. The good old man's intention is to prevent strangers from getting used to entering the home where the two girls will be left alone. Surprised by the early visit, the man of the house peeks through the wooden door and notices the hooded gentleman out in the yard, but the elderly man flashes an extremely suspicious smile, full of ulterior motives, at our dear family man. Seeing that scary expression, the young man sweats cold, remembering a human resources manager during a tense meeting. Wasting no time, the hunter puts his backpack on and turns his head, pretending he did not notice the old man's malice. At that instant, his wife calls his name, completely nervous and blushing, as she affectionately tries to pack her husband's snack. Watching the scene, the big guy blushes slightly, thinking about how incredibly adorable his new wife is. The lady feels completely awkward about the situation, while the little girl stares at her curiously and in silence. At that, the blonde-haired child suddenly starts running very hurriedly across the cabin's wooden floor. The little girl stops right in front of the hunter with open arms, leaving him totally surprised by her action. With a smile, the girl hands the cute lunchbox to the young man, while the mother watches nervously from behind. Next, the young woman helps her husband with his backpack, asking him to hurry and eat very well on his trip. The protagonist smirks, reflecting that having a family care for him like this is something truly wonderful. Before he leaves, the girl says a few words in her language, and the man assumes it is a request for him to return safely. Wanting to learn, the hero points at the lady and tries to repeat the same phrase, leaving his wife quite impressed. With that, the beautiful woman flashes a very gentle smile and nods, confirming that he got the pronunciation right. At that moment, the little daughter reaches out her little arm and gets the new father's attention, wanting to join the conversation too. The little child then repeats the same phrase, asking him to return safely, and the young man is amazed by her cuteness. Full of joy, the hunter waves at the little girl, promising that he would come back home soon, safe and sound. The mother and daughter keep waving with great excitement as they say goodbye to the protector of that small family. However, upon facing the mysterious old man, the big guy's expression changes, and he thinks he absolutely did not want to leave home. But even against his will, the hero sighs deeply and accepts his fate, knowing he needs to hunt to survive. Thus, the two walk for a long time through the dense forest, and the young man wonders how much time has passed. The young hunter gets exhausted and begins to question what the old geezer wants to show so badly that requires such a long hike. Suddenly, the experienced guide stops walking abruptly in the middle of the path, leaving the rookie confused by the pause. At that, the elderly man taps his foot on the dirt ground, and the protagonist wonders if it is a sign for him to look down. The mysterious hooded gentleman continues walking through the dense forest, dictating the pace of the journey. At that, the protagonist notices something strange and is confused as he follows the older man's footsteps. He notices that the footprints left by the elderly man on the dirt ground have a very bizarre shape. Intrigued, the young man wonders if that might be some kind of secret martial arts technique. With that, the hero decides that to learn this trick, he would need to imitate the master's every movement. Right after, the big guy adjusts his posture and starts trying to replicate that curious technique. Smirking, the experienced hunter looks back, noticing his new apprentice's effort. Thus, the two continue the long journey through the thick woods with the sun shining between the trees. During the trip, the gentleman teaches that each mountain has unique species by touching a tree. Furthermore, the old man helps the young man understand the terrain by having him draw the map right on the ground. Meanwhile, at the cabin, the hero's wife is surrounded by three very mean-looking men from the village. Without any warning, a cowardly blonde hits the young woman in the face, claiming she is out of line. The strong impact causes the fragile woman to be violently thrown straight to the wooden floor. Feeling a lot of pain, the poor girl tries to recover from the brutal attack as she pants desperately. At that moment, she turns her head and is terrified to see her little daughter hiding there in a dark corner. Seeing the child's scared look, the mother feels her heart freeze, fearing the worst for her little girl. Even trembling with dread, the protagonist's partner tries to act to protect her little daughter. Little Dorothy just watches everything in shock, unable to understand the reason for such cruelty. Crying heavily, the little girl blames herself, thinking that her own behavior caused all of that. Laughing at the misfortune, the vandals mock the fallen lady, not caring who might come to defend her. The thugs think they are safe because the mountain's protector does not understand any of their language and plan to stay quiet. But one of them warns that it would be a huge problem if they got caught, because experienced hunters are rare to find around there. Then the blonde grabs the lady's arm and suggests they take her deep into the dark forest so no one hears a thing. With that, the villain orders the others to grab the valuable things while he drags the young woman away from that cabin. At that moment, he threatens to burn the whole house down if she tells her husband anything when he returns from his hunt. But the scoundrels celebrate their big haul as they take the woman away, leaving little Dorothy alone in the dark. Hiding, the little girl trembles with fear, realizing something terrible is going to happen to her mother now that she was taken. At that, the little one breaks down in tears, wondering if the only person who cares for her will ever be able to return. Far away, the big guy rests on a giant rock while the veteran observes him with a very calm and serene look. Then the master reaches into his leather bag to grab something important, and the young man is curious about his gesture. Very calmly, the elderly man pulls out a small wooden object, and the hero wonders what the master intends to do now. At that moment, the old man allows the apprentice to finally take a break to eat the snack he brought in his backpack. With a huge smile, the young man opens the package, remembering all the love his little daughter put into that meal. He looks at the lunchbox's contents with great joy and feels like the luckiest man in the world to have a sweet family. But the smell of the meat and the fried egg awakens the hunter's hunger, and he praises the wonderful aroma of that home-cooked food. Unexpectedly, the elderly man gives a warning sign and orders the young man to close the food box immediately for safety. The hero is totally lost by the sudden order and wonders what he did wrong to get that scolding. Then the veteran explains that the smell of prepared food attracts dangerous beasts that can sense the scent from far away. With that, the protagonist gets discouraged, as that might be his only chance to enjoy his family's gift. At that instant, they arrive in front of a simple wooden cabin, and the master claims that this would be his new home. The elderly man then holds a bow with a very strange shape, and the young man finds it very weird. At that, the hero reflects that the only hunting weapons he knows have a very curved shape. Observing the straight object, the big guy wonders how anyone could manage to shoot with something like that. The mysterious gentleman says a few words in his language and hands the bow for the young apprentice to hold. With that, the master turns his back and walks across the grass, while the rookie doubts if that is even possible. The veteran then gets ready, and the protagonist notes that it must take massive strength to pull that. Right after, the old man firmly raises the weapon and draws the string with the arrow pointed upwards. Even pulling something so heavy, the experienced hunter does not even flinch, seeming like time stopped around him. Without warning, the arrow is fired, cutting through the air at high speed straight into a large tree trunk. The impact is startling, and the wooden weapon embeds deeply into the bark, sending splinters everywhere. Amazed by the technique, the young man finally understands how to use that exotic equipment. Determined, the family man mimics the master's stance and prepares to shoot with all his energy. At that, the little old man approaches and begins to correct the newcomer's arm so the shot comes out perfect. Upon seeing the hero holding the 10th string, the master is shocked because the giant does not flinch a single muscle. With an extremely serious look, the hunter focuses only on his target, ignoring everything happening around him. Then he begins to memorize every new word and all the necessary movements to become a great hunter. The protagonist promises to train hard to be able to solve all his problems without depending on anyone. His greatest desire now is to become a man strong enough to always support his wife and little daughter. Far away in the tranquility of the cabin, a cute voice sings about the blue sky and Reggie's beautiful hair. Little Dorothy lies in bed singing happily about the hero's dark hair and his tasty meat. Little Dorothy is so satisfied that she feels the meat is still growing inside her cute little tummy. At that, the little blonde notices that her mother is giving joyful laughs as she works there in the corner of the humble cabin. She reflects that the woman smiles much more since the great hunter arrived to care for them not long ago. With that, the girl feels a warm glow in her chest every time she hears the sound of her protector's laugh. But the child is already thinking about when her tummy will shrink so she can enjoy more of that delicious feast. Looking at the starry sky, the little girl wonders who the hero really is now that he is part of their lives. Dorothy knows very well that the man and the beautiful lady are not her blood parents, and this leaves her thoughtful. At that moment, a terrible fear rises in the little one's heart, as she fears being abandoned just as it happened in the past. She questions whether the big guy would take only the wife away and leave a useless child behind all alone. Tears start to well up in her big yellow eyes as she imagines being forgotten by her new family. Suddenly, a strange glow catches the little blonde's attention, waking her up from her sad thoughts instantly. Then the girl notices she is alone in bed and wonders where her mother could have gone in the middle of that dark night. At that, cruel voices of her former father echo in her mind, calling the girl useless for not being a strong boy. He complained that she was just a burden who wasted food, and the little one trembles with dread at these bad memories. But Dorothy runs quickly through the house, determined to protect the meat bucket before someone takes the food away. Checking the container, she breathes a sigh of relief seeing that the food is safe but continues looking for her protector. Suddenly, an authoritative shout coming from outside scares the child, who turns her head with great haste and fear. The little blonde is completely paralyzed by the shock and lets out a whimper of terror, realizing that something wrong is happening. Hiding, the girl peeks through a crack in the wooden wall and spots 3 very mean-looking men in the yard. Dorothy recognizes those cowards who used to hit her late father and caused all the suffering in the old house. Hidden behind the rocks, little Lizzie trembles with fear, worrying that something bad will happen to the woman. Meanwhile, 3 debt collectors surround the lady and brutally accuse her of having stolen their meat. But she cries and tries to explain that her husband hunted the animal, only for the big blonde guy to laugh mockingly. Soon another guy shouts, saying her husband has passed away, and accuses her of being an ungrateful thief. Even in tears, the young woman keeps denying it, and then the thugs decide to invade the house to search. Without the slightest pity, the aggressor shoves the girl forcefully to the ground, telling her to shut up immediately. As soon as they enter the dark shack, the trio comes across the immense wolf pelt displayed in the living room. Completely shocked, they slowly approach and can barely believe what they are seeing. With eyes shining with greed, the leader strokes the fur and realizes they have hit the jackpot. At that moment, excitement takes over, and the henchmen begin to rummage through every corner of the place. However, the little girl remains hidden under the furniture, hearing the invaders' footsteps very close. At that, the little girl panics, realizing the true intentions of those cruel men. Desperate, the mother runs inside and throws herself in front of the wolf pelt, stopping them from touching it. In tears, she raises her voice and warns them in no uncertain terms that this valuable item belongs to them. But the tension is so high that little Lizzie cannot take it and breaks down crying desperately in the corner. Crying heavily, the child runs outside the house and starts shouting for Joanne, begging for help quickly. Suddenly, a bubble spell shows the agonizing scene of the henchmen dragging the 2 through the woods. While all this commotion is happening, the protagonist walks peacefully through the dark forest until the mysterious gentleman accompanying him points his finger, calling his attention backward. However, the young man just bows politely and gives thanks for the help he received during that day. Suddenly, the protagonist hears a cry from afar and is shocked to recognize the little girl's voice. With that, the young man turns his face towards his cabin, feeling that something very bad is going down. He reflects, terrified, that his little girl would not cry like that without a very serious reason. At that, the big guy starts running desperately through the forest, fearing for the safety of his family. Arriving at the scene, the hero catches 3 thugs holding his wife and stealing all their things. At that moment, an uncontrollable fury takes over the hunter, who swears to put an end to the criminals' lives. The red-haired invader then turns around, confused upon hearing the heavy footsteps approaching behind him. Wasting no time, the husband lands a devastating punch straight to the kidnapper's face with all his might. The impact is so strong that the coward is thrown to the ground, and the hero steps in front of his beloved. The young wife then breathes a sigh of relief with tears in her eyes, seeing that her protector arrived in time. But the big guy says nothing and just walks furiously toward the other 2 thugs from the village. The black-haired henchman begins to sweat cold, terrified by the newcomer's dark expression. Then the protagonist lunges quickly and lands a brutal knee to the scared invader's stomach. The scammer collapses to the ground screaming in pain and can barely breathe after taking the relentless attack. Seeing his friends down, the last blonde criminal tries to land a desperate punch on our hero. However, the hunter dodges easily and grabs the enemy's arm, preparing to retaliate against the aggression. With an agile movement, he lifts the henchman into the air and throws him violently against the hard dirt ground. The brute lands awkwardly and feels the entire crushing impact of the blow on his own battered body. But the hero quickly pins him down and decides he cannot go easy on anyone who attacks his new family. At that, he punches the thug's face, reflecting that cruel people like this deserve a brutal punishment. With glowing eyes, the big guy decides to teach an unforgettable lesson so that these thugs never come back. At that, he furiously grabs the blonde invader by the shirt collar, while the young lady watches the scene completely in shock. Desperate, the wife shouts her husband's name, who turns slightly confused with his fist still emanating a strong energy. At that moment, the coward takes advantage of the distraction and attacks the hero from behind with a very sharp tool. But the giant warrior notices the threat in time and grabs the criminal's arm without needing to make any effort. This makes the hunter even more furious, and the henchman starts trembling with dread at the strength of that monster holding him. Then the young man displays a dark look and squeezes the enemy's arm, showing all his frightened power without mercy. The wife begs him to stop, and soon the old master also approaches, telling the apprentice to end the commotion. With that, the hooded elderly man firmly holds the big guy's arm, urgently asking him to calm down right away. The master points at the house, warning the new hunter that the commotion is making the girls very scared. The young lady stands there with her heart racing and in shock from all that tense situation in her yard. At the window, the little daughter cries in tears, fearing the bad men will hurt her new beloved family. At that, the hero notices the child's crying, and all his intimidating energy vanishes, being taken over by concern. The scene cuts, showing the humble wooden cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, indicating that things have calmed down. The girl reflects that her husband has always been sweet, and is surprised to discover that he can also be frighteningly lethal. She remembers her violent ex-husband as she watched the big guy take down those cowards so easily. That intense scene made her think for a brief second that she would also end up getting beaten the same way. However, upon looking into the young man's gentle eyes, that bad fear vanished completely because he did not want to scare anyone. The partner realizes that the beloved's tense look showed only pure desperation to keep them safe. But now the hunter calls her name in a sad way, thinking that his own wife is feeling afraid of him. Reiji wonders why her reaction scared her husband so much, since she considers herself just an ordinary woman of no value. The girl trembles and thinks that this attitude made him think she is afraid of him, even knowing there is no more reason to fear. With that, the wife mentally begs the hunter not to make such a sad and hurt expression over that whole situation. She thinks it would be very easy to say she is not afraid of him, but the different language unfortunately ends up being a major barrier. At that moment, the young woman gathers her courage and shouts the big guy's name with great force to catch her beloved husband's attention. The hero is surprised and stares at her with a very sweet look, while the lady looks back at him with great determination on her face. At that, the partner holds her partner's hands with great firmness and affection, trying to convey all her real feelings. The young woman feels the warmth of those large, calloused hands, having the absolute certainty that this warrior is her safe haven. She smiles in relief, knowing that by the side of this powerful protector, no one will ever be able to hurt her beloved family again. With tears of pure happiness, the young lady presses his hands to her face and thanks him with all her heart for finally being saved. The main character gets a serious expression, looking a little worried about the situation. Then his wife holds his face in her hands, saying the name Lizzie with tears in her eyes. The young woman then hugs him tightly, thanking him for saving her from those bad guys. The hunter wonders why she is so grateful for something like this. He hugs her back, covering her eyes, and thinks that he is the one who should be saying thank you. At that moment, the young lady is completely surprised by her partner's sweet gesture. The scene then shifts to little Dorothy, who is crying and feeling very scared. His wife yells the name Jo-won, pointing at the little girl who needs help. With that, the young man runs frantically toward the little girl, calling out her name. The mother also runs to her daughter, reaching out her hand and asking if she is okay. The woman gets a look of shock and worry when she sees how the little one is doing. The girl is so terrified that she ends up having a little accident out of fear. She remembers asking for help, but seeing the hero's huge fists was super scary. The child vividly remembers the hurt faces of her stepmother and Lizzie. So, the little one worried her own face would end up like that, thinking she could not cry or she would get hurt even more. Because of that, the girl decides she needs to apologize to Lizzie before she starts ignoring her. The little girl asks for forgiveness for hiding and begs not to be left behind. Crying, young Dorothy says that everything was her fault, but her mother hugs her warmly and asks what she is talking about. The woman explains that she pretended not to know her out of fear that those men would find her too. The woman assures her that Dorothy is not to blame for anything, and the little girl asks if that is true. Then the lady says that everything is fine now because Daddy has arrived, leaving the little one confused. Hearing this, the girl replies that Jo-won is just Lizzie's husband and that she already knows that. The mother then explains that since he is her husband, he is now Dorothy's daddy too. She reinforces that as her stepmother, the hero becomes her dad, leaving the child amazed. At that moment, the girl looks at their protector's back and wonders if he really is her daddy. The little one tilts her head from side to side in question, and her mother confirms it. The woman gently rubs her head, saying her new dad is different and will keep them safe. Dorothy then realizes he fought off those bad men because she asked him for help. With that, mother and daughter look out the cabin window together, watching the hunter. The girl then takes a deep breath and yells with all her might, calling him daddy. She thinks about how her new dad has a huge body with giant hands and feet. The little girl runs outside, thinking about how he is a super strong dad who keeps her safe. She remembers that he is kind and gave her a name, plus a plate of food to eat. The girl gets really happy thinking that the person who gave her a name is her new dad. Hearing the shout, the big guy turns around to see what is going on. In his eyes, he sees the reflection of little Dorothy running toward him with a smile. The young man then opens his arms to welcome the little girl running his way, and just like that, he hugs her tightly, and the girl laughs with joy in her new dad's arms. The hero thinks to himself that he does not understand her words, but he feels like he knows what they mean. The big guy holds little Dorothy in his arms, and she looks very happy and safe. He then notices a funny smell coming from her and wonders what it could be. The hunter realizes the girl ended up having another little accident because she was scared. He thinks her smile is so innocent that he actually feels bad for noticing. He decides he needs to change her clothes right away, and his wife comes running toward them. With that, the new family shares a hug and a very happy and touching moment for everyone. But the little girl remembers something important and asks where the meat they had is. The couple is surprised and the girl runs off, urgently shouting for the food. She runs toward the knocked out bad guys, and her new dad calls out her name in worry. The little girl runs right past the men on the ground without even caring about them. Her real goal was to find the wooden bucket with the pieces of meat. The little one then tries to lift the heavy wooden bucket using all her strength, but the object is way too heavy and starts tipping dangerously to the side. The girl falls to the ground but manages to support the bucket with her head, so she does not drop the food. Her parents run desperately to help her, yelling her name in a panic. The girl makes a face of extreme effort to keep the precious meat from falling. Somehow the little one lifts the bucket, and the hunter is amazed by her strength. He thinks her obsession with meat is a bit intense while his wife just smiles. Seeing this, the big guy decides to help and places the little girl herself inside the wooden bucket. He then lifts the bucket with his daughter inside, and she looks up with a joyful shout. The hero thinks that to a child, it is very easy to become a hero with just a bucket of meat. Then his wife shows up and asks him to bring the food inside the house. Next, the woman tells him to bring Dorothy in too, because it is not safe out there. The little girl runs excitedly to the cabin shouting for the meat, and the big guy follows her. Inside the house, the hunter lets out a long sigh of relief that everything turned out okay. But when he looks at the knocked out men on the ground, his expression completely changes. With eyes shining with anger, he gets a dark and very intense look. Just then, the old master suddenly appears and puts a hand on his shoulder to calm him down. The elder advises him not to fight people anymore, and the young man questions this order. He thinks about how becoming a captive again would be a problem and silently calls the bad guys' names in his head. The hunter looks at his wife and realizes that he is no longer alone in the world. With a fierce look, he promises to remember their faces and get back at them one day. Then the old man points to the gear the thieves left behind on the ground. The master suggests he take the items, since they are essential for surviving in the mountains. The young man looks at the cabin and sees his wife and daughter waiting safely for him. He goes inside with a confident smile, carrying the supply box and the wolf pelt. Inside the house, the hero kneels to organize the new tools he acquired. He thinks about how he already lost his family once, and that was more than enough. With a determined smile on his face, the young man seems to have a new purpose. He looks at his wife and daughter, swearing to keep them safe no matter what happens.